Too often, Christians are labeled only by what we're against. Media companies are quick to cue up angry protests and boycotts. And certainly, there's a place to stand against things. In the investment space, there are great ways to use our rights as shareholders to stand up against things that lead to brokenness. But in a world of boycotts, protest, and cancel culture, what does it look like to be different? What does it look like to stand for something? And what does it look like to stand for the flourishing of humanity? Faith-driven investing is centered on the fact that God has given us the gift of life, now and eternal, and that we have an opportunity to respond out of joy and gratitude to how we think about the investment capital that He has entrusted us with. And then as we accept the invitation to participate in the work that God is doing in the world, we grow from a monochromatic existence to a technicolor one. That means we have the opportunity to come alongside entrepreneurs, to grow with them, and to shape the relationships we want to be in with them. This is the essence of what it means to be a faith-driven investor. We gain access to the lifeblood that is free enterprise. Entrepreneurs that are pursuing an idea through their own sweat equity. This is something that is unavailable to public markets. What does that look like? How about creating jobs and opportunity, pushing innovation, bridging divides? Business itself can be a tool for healing some of the broken things in this world and driving returns at the same time. A decade ago, Sovereign's Capital co-founder Roush was inspired to be for something. He believed then, as he does now, that Christian-led businesses might be a force for good, and that our Christian faith might not be seen as a negative, but rather as a competitive advantage. Before Luke shares, we're going to watch the story of Southeast Lineman Training Center. This trade school in Dade County, Georgia, is bringing flourishing to families in the skilled trade industry. In a time when over 40% of all jobs in the U.S. are what are defined as blue collar, SLTC is serving as coach and mentor to the next generation as they enter the workforce. They're helping them bring meaningful work and helping them change generational outcomes for families with increased income. Let's watch.
Everybody runs from the storms. We are pack trucks up, we're going in.
We got to be there before anyone else could be there to make sure it's safe for anyone, because as being a lineman working on all those live wires, it's very dangerous.
We have on the back of our shirts, we are the few that go towards the storm. And ultimately that's what they do. They want to serve, they want to protect, but they also have this internal thing happening where they want to know that they're needed.
The workers of the next 100 years really want to be a part of something beyond just a profession. They want to be a part of mission. They want to understand how their work translates into impact in the world.
Southeast Lineman Training Center is a school that trains individuals basically in line work. And those two areas are the electrical line worker program and the communications line worker program. And so really it's an entry-level school for individuals wanting to get into the career. We've gone from one piece of property of 19 acres to over 100 acres, from one campus to 3 campuses, and a backlog for students trying to get into the trade, trying to get into SLTC.
As we continued to grow, we were responding to the growth. We weren't planning for the growth because we really had no concept of where this was going, how big it could be, or what God's plan was in it. I mean, we were truly just stewards trying to keep this thing on track and responding to the growth.
So the Lineman School, when we first met, had a very successful business. David and PJ had taken over the business from a father-in-law, and they had grown it significantly. But they weren't sure where they should go next, and so they were really looking for a strategic thought partnership to help them develop a confident plan for expanding the value of the business going further. So we were able to design a solution that solved a number of different problems for David and PJ and partner together over the last few years to really expand the value of the company together.
That's one of the things that I loved about Sovereigns is Sovereigns really helped us. Michael Tremaine, Luke Roush helped us to see the opportunities that we really had. We've always seen our business as mission and God-centered and wanting to love on students, but they allowed us to see just the impact that we can make and the unique opportunity that we have.
What we've seen kind of play out over the last couple of years as we've been really involved with these guys is a desire to both grow, but also get better and to raise the bar. And that's what we want to help them with as a capital partner and as a thought partner strategically about how do you grow well, how do you grow thoughtfully, how do you grow responsibly.
We are truly acknowledging that we're responsible for the lives that God's given us influence over, and we're intentional about that. Where can He go with it? I don't ever want to define it. I just want to experience it.
Biblical principles at work in the marketplace are actually an advantage to the business. We just tend to find that the more alignment that people have with real, true, timeless biblical principles, the better run businesses they are. And so they tend to actually outperform their peers. And that's part of the thesis at Sovereign's Capital that we're trying to demonstrate, that investing behind faith-aligned entrepreneurs is actually a great idea.
Back in those days, we would never have imagined that we would be where we are right now. What we could see is we knew that there was a demand, we knew there was a need, and we knew that what we were doing mattered, and we were investing in our students, and we were creating a great product. It's easy to build buildings and to have classrooms and to buy more land. What's difficult is to make sure that your instructors and your staff is prepared and passionate and has purpose in what they're doing, and to know that this is important. Every student that comes here, how we develop them and how we pour into them and what we train them and how we teach them is critical.
They have such a high view of the dignity of work, and they know that they're preparing these young men and women for a career, not just a job. And they also know they're preparing them for life. And they believe they're sending forth young men and women into the industry that are confident and capable and ready to make a difference.
There's not a single person here that doesn't want your best interest. I've always had like the slight fear of like I'm not gonna be anything in life, and this school really has kind of broke that for me, because this has given me the opportunity to hone in on a skill that not a lot of people have, and if I can put that skill to good use, I'll make something out of myself. And it was very good reassurance for me that, Bryce, take a deep breath, you're gonna make it in this world.
So when we have parents come in or friends and family come in and shake our hands at the end and say, you know, we dropped you off a child, you gave us back a young man, it's so encouraging, to the emails that come months to years later that, you know, of gratitude that, hey, we just got married, bought our first house, having our first child. Those are that's the fuel that keeps us going every day. For us, we know our faith is that greater purpose, and we have an awesome opportunity to kind of combine the spiritual and the practical in our training and our stewardship of the business. But the staff, for them to come alongside, like I said, that's the fuel for them to see these accomplishments of these young men and women when they get out into their career path and they have a new life they never planned for.
All investing is impact investing. The question is, what impact do we want our investing to have? We believe every private investment is an opportunity to have impact. What matters is understanding the impact that the business leaders feel called to deliver against, and then us as the investor, as an active partner, falling in love with their vision for where the business needs to go, what they're being called to, both in terms of business outcomes as well as spiritual outcomes. My job is to really pay attention to help break down barriers that either arise or exist at the time of investment for the management team, and try to equip them to be able to lead in the direction that they feel like God has called them to. The Old Testament contains a lot of rules and regulations. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they alone contain an estimated 613 laws. Everything from food laws for how to store and cook food, moral laws about murder and theft, sin offerings, specific designs for constructing altars, even instructions for future events. In today's world, the U.S. tax code contains more than 2,500 pages of laws, not including the estimated 70,000 pages of tax provisions. That is over 35 million words, or like reading the Bible 60 times. Back in the Old Testament, something interesting happens with those 613 laws. In fact, a group of people forms with a focus on laws, the Pharisees. The Pharisees felt themselves to be superior in their understanding of the law and worked hard to create a culture where strict observance of the traditional and written law was expected. They set up new instructions and built a hedge around the law, almost like a wall around a wall. For example, one of the 10 Commandments instructs the Israelites to keep the Sabbath holy. Fair enough. One law for one day, and it's an important one. The Pharisees, however, took it a step further. If keeping the Sabbath holy, they reasoned, means not working during that 24-hour period, it'd be helpful to define what qualifies as work. The Pharisees are not alone in their desire to know what rules and regulations they need to obey in order to draw closer to God. We all want that. It's human nature in us that makes grace so difficult to accept. When it comes to investing, faith-driven investors have oftentimes been no different. We built hedges around what we can and cannot do, and instead of actively engaging in good work, we focused on avoiding that which we perceive as negative and or sinful. As a group, we've become known oftentimes more for what we are against rather than what we are for. Does this mean that we should embrace all things? No. But it does mean that oftentimes we miss the opportunity to be primarily known for what we're for in the world as opposed to what we stand against. So, what are we against? The negative list looks different for different people, but there are a handful of areas that most believers might want to avoid. Things like abortifacients, adult entertainment, gambling, tobacco, alcohol, food sources that are unsustainable, other things like that. Many faith-driven investors would elect not to actively invest in these markets. Many investors screen assets that touch those markets out of their portfolios or actively engage with companies that have exposure to these areas in an effort to affect corporate policy change through discourse. And in many cases, screening and engagement are a healthy practice. There are certain things that Christians should stand in opposition to in one way or the other. From the aforementioned partial list, adult entertainment and abortifacients are two issues which all believers will largely agree on. However, the methodologies for how we act differently as faith-driven investors are varied, even on those two issues. Amongst the long list of problematic markets, we can find ourselves on a slippery slope where the difference between our opinions, our beliefs, and our convictions gets muddy. Opinions are transient, formed regularly, and evolve quickly as data emerges. Beliefs have more staying power, but can shift based on data and lived experience. Convictions are powerful, lifelong truths that we should be prepared to debate vigorously while defending them. Collectively, they create a lens through which other information passes. When we treat our opinions as if they're convictions, we run the risk of doing ourselves a disservice. The early faith-driven investing movement was largely about what we screened out of our portfolios. This wasn't a bad thing. For me and my family and for many other believers, I know it's an important part of our strategy. Yet what we avoid has come to define too much of our legacy, in my opinion, as Christian investors. The Bible promises much more than that. God didn't call us to comfort. He didn't invite us to take the easy way out. There's a reason the path is narrow, and when we focus only on negative screening, we're capturing an incomplete picture. We run the risk of doing what the Pharisees did with the law. It can become a game of one-upmanship where we see who can draw the lines tighter and tighter and tighter. Consequently, faith-driven investing can start to be about cultural avoidance and withdrawal rather than cultural engagement and leaning in. I think that's the best case to be made for positive screening. We are called to lean in with truth, shared in love, and celebrate great things that God is doing in and through the marketplace. This is an exciting message. We must seek out, embrace, and pour ourselves into the creation of new things. We must find businesses and organizations that are rooting out sin in the world, either directly or indirectly. We must think about restoration in anticipation of a new heaven and a new earth coming to be. We must do the work to find businesses that are actually standing for things. N.T. Wright does a great job describing the four-part gospel in the creation, the fall, redemption, and restoration. I grew up really with the middle two, but Wright does a great job of unpacking all four narratives that run throughout Scripture. Of these four, three are really positive: creation, the redemption story, and restoration. So when we think about what we are for, we want to be able to tie into three of these four narratives. Three are positive and only one is negative, sin to be avoided. Creation, redemption, and restoration involve moving toward something, not away from something. The fall describes something to avoid. It's a simple metric, but I'm a simple guy. Looking at these four narratives, 75% of them suggest how we invest through positive screens as opposed to negative avoidance. That's just one way to look at our strategies and to try to find a balance between negative screening, positive screening, and active engagement. We want to find companies in the world that we can embrace while also acknowledging that some avoidance is appropriate. In our work at Sovereign's Capital, we largely think about what we want to embrace. What do we want to engage in? What do we want to be known for? How can we identify entrepreneurs and business leaders who are creating new things, who are redeeming broken things, and restoring the world to God's original design? Here, there is plenty of room for an individual interpretation and leading of the Holy Spirit. It's not my place to actually make those calls. At Sovereign's Capital, this framework has helped our thinking materially. Instead of being solely focused on the type of investments we want to avoid, we get to focus on the leaders and business models that we want to support and encourage, concepts and ideas that promote human flourishing, creation care, and narratives that reflect God's plan for humanity. Examples are always helpful to bring these concepts to life. One company that we've seen exhibit this intentionality is Grab, a company based in Southeast Asia. Anthony Tan, who's the founder and CEO, had the idea for Grab about the same time that Uber was being born in the US. What he realized, and what I saw firsthand as I was living there with my family at the time, was that safe and accessible public transportation in Southeast Asia was virtually non-existent. Japan and Europe have incredible train systems, but nothing like that existed in Southeast Asia. Taxis and private car services were largely the primary options. So Anthony realized that there were millions of riders getting in taxis every day all over his home country of Malaysia, where we were living, who were uncertain about the common thing you'd expect from a taxi service. What am I going to get charged when I get out of this taxi? How long is it going to take me to get there? Am I going to get taken for a ride? And am I going to get dropped off in a bad part of town to get mugged? All these issues for riders made it unsafe, and much of that insecurity was actually hurting women and children the most as they relied on public transportation. But the problem didn't stop with the riders. Taxi drivers also faced the same uncertainty around earned wages, knowing their taxi company would take a huge cut out of whatever they made. They were left wondering if they were going to get paid back at the end of the week and if they'd be able to put food on the table for their families. In the midst of that ambiguity, drivers often ended up taking matters into their own hands and extracting some version of extortion or a toll on riders that got into their taxi, anything to assure that they would just get paid. All of that made for a messy and broken system, which Anthony stepped into the middle of it. He created a company that stands for safety, transparency, and reliability. Now Grab is the largest technology startup in Southeast Asian history. It acquired Uber in the region, and it went on to populate every country in Southeast Asia with over 3 million drivers on their platform, as well as more than 10 million merchants that rely on Grab Financial Services, which is a parallel business unit that grew out of their roots in transportation. What makes Anthony's story powerful is that he didn't set out to attack the broken system. He wasn't trying to tear down the taxi companies. In fact, where Uber disintermediated taxi companies, Anthony worked with the existing players to equip them with services that would make the whole ecosystem better. His goal was to create something that stood for certain values, knowing that defining his company by what it was for would be better than marking it only by what it is against. But being for things requires risk. And at the end of the day, it's easy to define ourselves by what we are against. That's not risky. But if we're trying to invest and eliminate any and all risk, then we're never going to put a dollar towards anything. We have to acknowledge that systems are broken, people are broken, and we're going to make mistakes. We're never going to be able to fully eliminate sin from our portfolios. We just can't. As long as we invest in people on this side of heaven, we are investing in sinners, and that's a reality. And yet, it's our job to lean in and be cultural change agents rather than retreating into some sort of a holy huddle. There's always going to be this messiness. There are still companies in our portfolio that aren't living up to their missional potential. They are not completely seizing the opportunity that God has put in front of them. Do their imperfections mean that we should divest of that company? Of course not. Instead, we need to lean in. We need to ask questions. Sometimes those questions are uncomfortable. How can we change this? How do we do a better job filtering? Should we bring in a chaplain or a chief spiritual officer? These are all questions that Had we avoided the company in the first place, we wouldn't even be allowed to ask today. I don't want to wake up in 10 years as an investor and have a bunch of examples where nothing went wrong. I want to have a bunch of examples where stuff went wrong, but a lot of stuff that went right too. Ships aren't built to stay in the harbor. They're designed to go out and sail. But at the same time, they're also designed with a bilge pump. Why is that? Because even the shipbuilder knows that every ship is going to take on water at some point. And as faith-driven investors, I believe that we are more like the Marine Corps than the National Guard. Faith-driven investors get to decide what hills we're willing to die on. There are certain negative screens that absolutely should exist, but culture is going to try to bait us into drawing more and more lines in the sand that don't really have to be there. Squabbling around what's permissible and what is not is what the Pharisees spent their whole lives doing. The reality is that there are just too many cool things that are being done in the marketplace that we can be radically for. And that's how I'm called to spend the time God has granted to me. We are for radically loving our people. We are for radically loving our customers. We are for the provision of an outstanding product or service delivered in a way that celebrates who God made us to be. The avoidance strategy has the risk of becoming all salt and no light. And conversely, there's risk that in being focused on what we're for, we can be all light and no salt. So we have to find the balance. We have to grow comfortable in knowing that we are not perfect, but that we're engaging with investments that lean into the world boldly. I say onward in both truth and love, not for our name's sake, but for His name's sake.
Putting it all on the line. This is the Southeast Lineman Training Center motto. Seems like this statement is one we as faith-driven investors can adopt as we look for ways to engage with the culture around us, rather than simply hiding ourselves away from it. What does that look like for us as investors, regardless of where God has placed us? How would our approach change if we pursued the things we are for rather than just pushing away the things we are against? This can look different based on where we are. In the Southeast United States, where SLTC is based, faith and religion are not hard to bump into on a daily basis. What is our approach in a context where assumptions about Christianity, both positive and negative, are prevalent? How does this compare to other parts of the world where proclaiming a Christian faith is in the minority or even outlawed? In either instance, our actions can speak volumes about what we believe and the God we worship. Imagine if every faith-driven investor used 100% of our capital to deliver societal impact, spiritual integration, and financial return, to take what God has given us and put it back into the work He is doing on earth, and to promote products and services that further human flourishing. Spend some time in your group talking about this session and how it relates to the journey you're on. Open yourselves up to learning from one another. Be honest with each other. What you get out of this time together will only be as enriching and life-giving as what you put into it. See you next session.
Faith-Driven Investor is a discipleship ministry from Faith-Driven Movements, a non-profit corporation whose mission is to inspire and mobilize people to use their time, talent, and resources to impact the world around them. The materials are for informational purposes only. All investing carries risk, so be sure to consult an advisor before making any investment decisions. Hosts and guests may maintain positions in the companies and securities discussed. For all other questions, please visit faithdriveninvestor.org.